Cool. Oh, how's it going, guys? It's Devin here with Make Anything. Yeah, I've been playing a lot with my VR headset, and one of the funny side effects of having one of these things is it forces you to really clean your room because you want as much space to play in as possible. So I've got 3 backpacks, one for school, one for hiking, and one that I made myself, and they're taking up some space on the floor. So today I decided to 3D print the solution. I'm gonna make some really slick, minimal wall hangers so that I can get these things off the floor and out of the way. So that's what we're doing today. Let's go ahead. So here is the final part in SolidWorks. So as you can see, it looks like one pretty much seamless part, and it's super simple. But there's a little bit going on here that you can't exactly see. So if I turn the lines on, it's actually 2 parts. And I did that so that I could hide the screw inside of the part and not have it visible, because I want this to look like it's basically just coming straight out of the wall. So let's go back to the beginning, and I'll just quickly run through what I did to get to this point. So the first thing I did here is a loft, and basically that means I've created 2 sketches, this top and bottom surface, and then SolidWorks creates a solid shape by transitioning between one shape to the next. And that creates this shape that I wanted here. The next thing I did was cut off this 25-degree section on the back of the part. And that creates that downward angle that makes this a hook. So when you put a strap on there, it'll slide towards the wall and stay there instead of sliding off the wall, which you obviously don't want. Next, I did a little cut revolve on the tip of this hook. So I wanted it to be a little rounded. It just looks friendlier and more finessed. Alright, so now that I have the general shape, I did this cut extrude from the top down, and I basically created this dovetail joint. And that's going to be my way of joining these 2 pieces together so that they stay together. Of course, the way it is right now, it would still be able to just slide all the way through, so I have to create some kind of a stopper on the bottom of my hook. So what I did was cut away a little bit of the dovetail on this longer part, and I'm going to change the color so you can distinguish the 2 sides. But yeah, so I cut that tab off, and then I filled it back in, but this time it's part of the smaller piece. So if I do a cross section, you can see there's this stopper here that keeps the hook from sliding all the way down. Next, I did a revolve cut based on the dimensions of the wood screw that I'm using. So you can see I measured the diameter of the head, and I also measured the diameter of the threaded area to make sure that the screw would be able to go in there and be flush and nice. I added a few chamfers just so it prints cleaner. And then also up here on the top, I didn't quite like how this rabbet joint looks because these angles don't really line up with the other angles on my part. So I decided to cut another chunk out of the top and then refill it with another tab that follows the lines of my model a little better. And that also acts as an additional stopper to make sure everything is held in place. So that's pretty much all there is to it. I just reoriented the parts that way they're both flat on the build plate, like this. And as you can see, I made this specifically so I could print it without any support material, which is always my goal. Now, in order to print this without support material, I actually have the 2 parts oriented differently. So you can see the dovetail here is going nearly vertical, and yet the dovetail on the base section is horizontal. And that affected the tolerances when I was designing this model. So if we look back at that extruded cut that I used to create the dovetail joint, the width of that cut is only 0.01 millimeters. And normally I'll do something like 0.2 or 0.25 millimeters for a nice tight fit. But since we're printing in 2 different orientations, and because of the way my printer is calibrated, that didn't quite work, and I actually ended up having to make the tolerance a lot tighter. So my first attempt at this print actually came out a little too loose, and I had to adjust it until I was able to figure out that that little tiny 0.01 millimeter tolerance worked the best. So let's go ahead and look at how that printed out. If you look closely here, you'll notice that I'm printing the 2 parts with a different infill. So the part that's going to be screwed into the wall has about 80% infill because I don't want the screw to crack the PLA. But the other part of the hook is only printed at 15% infill because, well, PLA is pretty darn strong and that's all that I need to hold up my backpacks. So here's that iteration that finally worked, fitting together nice and neat. Compare that to my first attempt, and you'll see that was pretty loose, and that's when I had a 0.2mm tolerance. So depending on the orientation that you print your joints, the tolerance might change. The screw, however, did fit nice and perfectly on my first try, and it's always satisfying when a real part fits with a 3D printed part really nicely. Alright, so now that I've got my hooks, I just need to install them on my wall. So I'm going to use this stud finder to figure out exactly where the wooden supports behind the drywall are. And while you could just screw these into the wall wherever you like, using a stud finder and making sure that you're screwing into one of those 2x4s is going to give you a lot more strength and safety with your hooks. Next, I drilled a pilot hole, which will just help guide the wood screws straight into the wall. And then I just screwed that base of the hook into the wall and made sure it was really tight and slipped on the end. As you can see, it works pretty well. So I added 2 more hooks, 16 inches apart, as the studs in a wall usually are, and that just happened to also be a great distance for these hooks to be separated, so that worked out well. Well, check it out. What do you think? I think it's a nice clean solution. I've got a lot more space on my floor now, so I'm pretty excited and pretty happy with how that turned out, and it didn't take too long at all. I think the next step for this project would be to modify the hook so that it can hold my guitar against the wall. That'd be pretty cool, but that's for another episode. Until then, I'm Devin, and this is Make Anything. Don't forget to stay inspired.